These days, it's fashionable in some circles to talk about a new Africa of hope, new horizons and vast untapped potential. But the continent still has an image problem, especially when it comes to corruption. And one country that suffers from this more than most is Nigeria, where the dominant perception is of a rabid political and business elite stealing billions of dollars while the majority suffers. But Nigeria is cracking down, throwing into jail people previously thought untouchable. The problem is some Western banks don't appear to be fulfilling their side of the bargain. According to the organisation Global Witness, British banks have been accepting dodgy deposits from bent Nigerian politicians in breach of all kinds of regulations. So how widespread is this, and what's the cost to Nigeria? That's our topic this week on Africa Today.
5 British banks have been accused of fueling corruption and entrenching poverty in Nigeria. In a damning report, the campaign group Global Witness alleged Barclays, NatWest, RBS, HSBC and UBS have accepted millions of pounds in deposits from corrupt Nigerian politicians. In 2001, British banks were attacked by London's Financial Services Authority for helping former Nigerian ruler Sani Abacha to siphon billions of pounds through the UK. Earlier this year, the Africa Progress Panel, chaired by former UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan, called for more transparency in the awarding of big business contracts, and recently the Nigerian government has even thrown previous untouchable figures into jail. But with Western banks slow to implement reforms, is Abuja fighting a lost cause? This week, Africa Today asks whether the financial institutions that brought us the global economic meltdown are also responsible for much of the looting in Nigeria.
Hello, I'm Henry Bonsu and welcome to Africa Today. How do you rid a country of corruption? On the surface, it seems obvious. Create tight regulations and rules for business in the public and private sector, open up the awarding of jobs and contracts, and above all, make your banking system transparent so you know where the money goes. Nigeria is taking that last message pretty seriously these days, perhaps because it's got a worse reputation than most. Recently, it even jailed some very big names, making headlines around the world. But has it been fighting with one hand behind its back? According to Global Witness, several British banks have accepted dirty money in recent years, despite countless reports saying banks need to get their act together. So, here's the question. Are Western banks the crux of the problem here? Or are the crooks so devious it's almost impossible to stop them? And what about the cost to the people? With me today to discuss this are Chidi Obihara, who's a former investment banker and executive partner at Next Rubica, Christian Udechukwu from Business in Africa Events, and Kayode Ogundamisi from the Nigeria Liberty Forum. I'm going to start with you, Chidi, as a banker or former investment banker. It looks pretty serious, doesn't it? I mean, Barclays, NatWest, RBS, HSBC and UBS, all household names in the West, helping to fuel corruption and entrench poverty in Nigeria. How seriously do you take this? Should we take this?
There's absolutely no doubt that there is a strong historic basis for thinking that a lot of money was taken out of the country inappropriately, illegally, and by people who were simply rent seekers who didn't deliver value to their constituents. Now that's historic, but there have been so many changes that have taken place, both here in the generic West and also in Nigeria itself, that have changed that picture remarkably.
And making it more difficult to take dodgy money and deposit it and hide it away.
Absolutely. My opinion of this report is that it's, unfortunately, just a little bit too backward looking and doesn't reflect where we are today.
Right. What kind of changes, what kind of instruments have been brought in both here and in Nigeria?
Absolutely. I'll start with Nigeria first. In Nigeria, the passing of the Fiscal Responsibility Act in 2009 has changed the landscape completely. There are extremely tough controls on how politicians reflect wealth while in office and after office. I'd say perhaps the toughest controls on Earth, in the planet. Nigeria is the only country that I know of where politicians have to declare their full asset base on entry into office. So they have to redeclare their asset base on exit from office, and the difference compared and looked at.
Is it enforceable if you see a disparity? Is somebody going to get thrown into jail because of it, or at least be tried?
Well, we've come to the point now where many politicians fear that this is a real possibility. We've seen several high-profile figures go the wrong side of the FCC, and we've seen the people of Nigeria support a gentleman called Anihu Ribadu, former head of EFCC, who has packed a punch in popular support in Nigeria that has been very difficult to rival. But this is the story in Nigeria, and this is a two-sided coin. Here in Britain, and certainly in the States as well, there's been a strong sense in which the FSA has taken a very, very strong stance.
The Financial Services Authority.
Forgive me, the Financial Services Authority in Britain has taken a very, very strong stance in looking at the way that UK banks, or at least banks who operate in the UK, take care in reporting appropriately the names and the amounts of deposits that are made by clients. And sometimes, certainly for amounts over figures as small as £5,000, clients are required to fill out a form explaining where the money has come from, what individual it's come from, and why they've been paid that money. Now, these are also extremely stringent rules. Now, I don't want to be too detail-focused in challenging Global Witness's report, but you start off by saying, you'll forgive me for saying this,
yes.
You do start off by saying that there are 5 British banks
yes.
who have been doing this.
It sounds terrible.
And then you mention UBS,
right,
which is the United Bank of Switzerland. It isn't a facile point because British banks operate in a market like any other, which is international. They have to compete for funds against other banks around the world. And relatively speaking, I'd definitely say that the strength of controls in Britain outweigh the ones you find in places like Switzerland or Monaco, or anywhere else anyone who wanted to hide their money could take their money to.
All right, thank you very much for that. Let's go to Kayode Ogundamisi from the Nigeria Liberty Forum. Chidi Obihara saying this report is backward-looking. So much has happened now, the situation has changed. What do you think?
Thanks for having me on the program. I don't know how current Chidi is with Nigeria and corrupt politicians. To describe this report as backward-looking is a bit quite difficult thing for me to comprehend.
Well, he's quoted a number of legal instruments, changes in the law. He talked about the Fiscal Responsibility Act in Nigeria, very stringent, and the level of detail you have to give if you're depositing more than £5,000 here. That's different, isn't it?
If I bring it home to your viewers, when you're talking about banks carrying out checks on depositors, they are not looking at the politician. They're looking at the ordinary Nigerians in the streets of London, trying to deposit maybe £1,000, £1,000. I beg your pardon, trying to do a formal business. When they see the Nigerian passport, then they do checks. But when you're talking about politically exposed persons bringing money, stolen money from Nigeria into the UK, this report is quite clear. It checks the role of one person is Alama Siag, a former governor, who earns £17,000 per annum, and had more than £1 million in his house in London. Now, if I bring Chidi's attention to a recent case of just last year, we had the case of James Ibori, a Niger Delta governor, being allegedly bringing money into the United Kingdom, and you had Nigerians coming out on the streets to call on the British government to bring him to justice. And that led to the conviction of his sister and one of his concubines. It is not true that the report is backward looking. This report reflects the feeling of every Nigerian on the street. We ask, how come it is easy for Nigerian politicians to bring money into UK banks with all the so-called regulatory bodies that the British government put in place?